Paper 2 is divided into two sections, Section A and Section B. We'll look at that in a moment. These are the textbooks you more than likely use in class or at home for this. These are the two authorized textbooks by Pearson and Hodder. So this is what the front of your exam paper is going to look like. Just briefly before we begin, I just want to show you the grade boundaries for the last 2 years. So there's 2018 on the right, 2019 on the left. I think what you'll find quite surprising is that grade boundaries actually dropped in 2019. Now, these are not the grade boundaries just for the Cold War. They don't have grade boundaries just for the Cold War because it's just one section of paper 2. So these are the grade boundaries for the Cold War and the Elizabeth and Henry papers combined. Okay, so I don't even know if they are, but I think what's the important thing to take away from this is that the grade boundaries, most people thought the grade boundaries would rise after the first year. People thought that they, as teachers and students got to know the course, that the grade boundaries were extra, but they actually dropped. So it actually became easier to get a 987 in the course in 2019 as opposed to 2018. So that's what you're looking at for respective grades in those courses. Now, what is paper 2? Well, it's an hour and 45 minutes and you get 64 marks for the whole paper. It's divided into Section A and Section B. Section A is a period study, so Cold War we're obviously doing, and Section B is the British depth study. So you're going to be doing Normans, King Richard, King John, Elizabeth or Henry. That's the British depth study. Both sections have some similarities, i.e. they're both 32 marks each, and you both spend about 50 minutes on each side of the course. You actually have to spend 47.5 minutes per paper to make the hour and 45-minute deadline. But I'll give you some estimates for how many minutes you should spend on each question to ensure you don't run out of time. Section A has 4 questions, question 1, question 2, and question 3, but question 3 has to be answered twice. So there are 2 parts to question 3. Each question is worth 8 marks. So that's question 1, 8, 2, 8, 3.1, 8, and 3.2 is worth 8 marks. Whereas Section B has 3 questions, 1A, 1B, 1C, and they're worth 4, 12, and 16 marks respectively. Okay, so we're just going to concentrate on Section A for this part of the course. So what does question 1 ask you to do? Well, question 1 is an explain question. You have to explain 2 consequences of something. Explain 2 consequences of Khrushchev's secret speech. Explain 2 consequences of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Explain 2 consequences of the Cuban Revolution. So anything that happened as a result of something. That's what you're looking at for this question. This is how it's going to look in your exam paper. So you're given space for consequence 1 and space for consequence 2. This question is marked separately. So consequence 1 carries 4 marks and consequence 2 carries 4 marks. So no matter how good you do in consequence 1, you can only get 4 marks for it. Okay, so make sure you have 2 very distinct consequences for this question. You have 10 minutes to answer this question, so that's 5 minutes per consequence. Simple structure for this question is point, evidence, explain. I'm sure most students and teachers are aware of this format for answering a question. The first point is you answer the question in one sentence. So the questioner explained 2 consequences of the Cuban Revolution. 1 consequence of the Cuban Revolution, it led to communists coming to power in Cuba. Okay, just answer the question in 1 sentence. Then provide at least 2 bits of historical evidence to back up that point. Okay, provide at least 2 pieces of historical evidence. And then explain the relevance of your evidence in the context of the question. So if you look at the Cuban Revolution, you might talk a little bit about how the consequence of the Cuban Revolution was it led to Castro coming to power. Castro was a communist. He wanted to remove American influence. This was important as it led to worsening relations between Cuba and America because we can see the Americans no longer buying Cuban sugar. So you need to explain how the Cuban Revolution led to Castro coming to power. Okay, and then you need to do that twice for 2 consequences. Question 2 is the narrative account question. All right, and this question will come up and write a narrative account analyzing the key events in. So I've highlighted the key words in this question. I think that's important for you to do as well, is like maybe highlighting the key words that come up in the question when you approach this in an exam. So there's 8 marks for this question. That's how it comes up in an exam. You're going to be given 2 bullet points that's going to give you some information about how to answer this question. It's just going to jog your memory a little bit. You don't have to use the bullet points, it's at your discretion. 12 to 15 minutes to answer this question. I would aim for 12 minutes because if you run to 15 minutes, you're going to give yourself slightly less time for question 3. Okay, so what do we do? Let's break it down. So the key events, aim for at least 4 events. I would like to see you aiming for 6, especially if you're aiming for a level 7, 8, or 9, but at least 4 events you should be able to do. Okay, so aim for at least 4 key events. The events must be in chronological order for this question. Okay, so if you like the question on the slide mentions the Hungarian Uprising, if you mention the invasion before the causes of the invasion, then that's not in chronological order, and you're going to be capped at 4 out of 8 marks. 4 out of 8 marks is 50%. That puts you on a level 5. Okay, so you want to be getting more than that. The events must be analyzed for significance. You don't just list the events in bullet point form. You write in paragraphs and you say, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. This was important as it forced the Hungarians to begin a guerrilla campaign. Okay, so you need to have lots of analytical sentences like, this was important, this was significant. As a result of this, you need to use that type of language in this question because they're the kind of sentence starters that lead to analyzing. The events must be linked together. So don't try and, but by analyzing, you will end up doing that. By saying this led to, you are effectively linking the events together. I found a good way to get my students to structure this, because you have to make sure that the events lead to an outcome, is to kind of loosely structure it into 3 paragraphs, having the causes of the events it's asking, having the actual events, the military intervention, and then having what was the consequence or the conclusion of the question it's being asked. Okay, it's the kind of question I find if you practice this question, it becomes very, very easy and straightforward to do, because you don't have to be comparing different factors. You literally just have to give a historical account with some analysis thrown in. Question 3, and before I come to question 3, I want to show you how this comes up on the paper, because there has been reports that this kind of catches students out a little bit. So it gives you the question like that, and then when you turn the page, it gives you the question again with little boxes. So make sure you read the instructions carefully, because you have to mark the box and then answer that question. And when you go to answer the second one, you mark another box and then answer the second one. Okay, so you'll see that when you open the paper, there's going to be 2 or 3 sets of questions for this. Okay, so explain the importance of something. This is a tricky question. For my class, other teachers might have different experience, other students might have a different experience. I find this is the question that my students tend to score the lowest on. So you're asked to explain the importance of an event, let's call it X, on an aspect of the Cold War, let's call it Y. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of algebra to try to explain how to answer this question. Hopefully that doesn't make you run from the video. So let's look at an actual question. Explain the importance of the dropping of the atomic bomb, let's call that X, for the development of the Cold War, Y. Okay, so this is not asking you about one specific event, e.g. just the atomic bomb. It's asking you how one event affected another event. Okay, so it's asking you the relationship between one event and one aspect of the Cold War. Right. I think this is why it's tricky. What a lot of students tend to do for this question is just explain the importance of the first event. So they see atomic bomb and they just say, well, the atomic bomb, this was massive. The Americans dropped it on Japan in 1945 and the Soviets were very angry as a result of this. And so you need to explain, what did the atomic bomb, how did it develop the Cold War? So you can go with the point, evidence, explain structure again for this question. So your point, give a reason why X was important for Y. So you might say the atomic bomb was important for the development of the Cold War because it led to an arms race. Okay, that's a reason why X was important for Y. Okay, then you give historical evidence of the event X, e.g. you could talk about the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a result of Truman's orders. And then you explain how it impacted Y. Well, you can say the Soviet Union and USA were no longer allies after the Second World War. The Soviets were frightened that the Americans would invade, and when they saw the atomic bomb, it forced them to accelerate their weapons development program. This led to an arms race and developed the Cold War and the mistrust between the two sides, if that kind of makes sense. After each section of the course, we're going to be looking at a specific question. So I think when we actually look how you answer this question, it'll make it a little bit clearer. So don't worry too much now if, oh, that question seems a little bit daunting. When we actually come to a worked example, it'll become a little bit easier. And as you practice 3, 4, 5 of these questions, it'll start to make sense how you answer the question. The key thing is just linking X to Y. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. Thank you.